The ancient Greek general and historian Thucydides famously theorised, when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling one, the most likely outcome is war. And it appears the two most powerful nations are edging closer to conflict. There's a major struggle occurring between the United States and China, and Australia is trapped in the middle. This week, the US renounced China's claims in the South China Sea and sent more warships to the region. Our Prime Minister Scott Morrison recently announced an historic funding boost to our military with a strong focus on countering a perceived Chinese threat. All this while Beijing and Washington DC engage in a trade war, with leaders on both sides accusing the other of espionage, human rights violations and stirring up trouble abroad. So how is all this likely to end? Is a military conflict, as Thucydides' theory suggests, inevitable?
From an agrarian regional player to global superpower in a few decades, China's rise is as remarkable as it was sudden. The communist regime enacted sweeping reforms from the 1970s. It's established a capitalist light market and lifted hundreds of millions of its citizens out of extreme poverty. 2 decades ago, the US normalised trade relations and pushed for China's successful entry into the World Trade Organization. But China continues to face criticism over its economic practices. It's accused of widespread theft of intellectual property and manipulating its currency.
There was this thought that China would play by the WTO's rules and maybe open up and democratized. That clearly hasn't happened.
China is expected to unseat the United States as the world's strongest economy in just 10 years' time, but it's a position which won't be relinquished so readily.
We have seen a ramp up of competition in many different ways, and of course that's also, as you're seeing, affecting the China-Australia relationship as well.
Donald Trump campaigned on putting China in check, for correcting a then $500 billion trade deficit and addressing perceived aggressive behaviour abroad. President Trump implemented around $550 billion worth of tariffs on Chinese goods. China responded in kind. A trade war was triggered. The feud between two of our biggest trading partners, of course, impacted Australia. It led to a decrease in Chinese demand for our minerals and significant drop in global trade volumes, and forces our government into a difficult balancing act. As China faces multiple geopolitical battles, it's waging a war on freedoms at home. The Communist Party is cracking down on dissent. The newly implemented national security laws mean protesters in Hong Kong can be imprisoned for life in mainland China.
The United States is deeply concerned about the law's sweeping provisions and the safety of everyone living in the territory, including Americans.
Western right watchers have also expressed concern over China's treatment of religious minorities and critics of the government, its strict speech laws and mass surveillance. Nations, including Australia, are asked to consider whether we should be condoning this sort of behaviour. Tensions are escalating and the troops are ready. China's boosted its military budget by 6% from last year. It's also been building islands for bases and buying influence in the Pacific. The US, which spends 3 times as much on weapons, has surrounded China with military bases and carries out regular war games off the Chinese coast and in neighbouring nations, and sails warships through the disputed South China Sea.
Saying this is freedom of navigation has nothing to do with freedom for anyone here in the US or anyone anywhere else in the world. This is military arrogance and making extremely dangerous threats.
While Australia recently announced a massive military spending boost with $270 billion to be invested over the next 10 years.
It was very clear in the policy, in the way that dollars are going to be spent with this new increase in defense spending, that China was a major audience of this.
The United States defence policy now deems China as a strategic competitor, and two nations have previously come to the brink of conflict. China's power and influence is ever increasing. It is indeed a rising power threatening to displace the ruling one. Will Thucydides' maxim hold true? Are we bound for war?
I don't think we're inevitably headed for war, but it is wise for the United States, its friends and allies, to beef up just in case. Better be prepared than be unprepared.